Somewhere in the humid thickets of the southeastern United States, coiled quietly among the vines, there lives a snake that most Americans have walked right past without ever noticing it. It is thin as a pencil, bright green from nose to tail, and almost completely harmless. But hidden inside this ordinary-looking reptile is a biological trick so strange that when scientists finally understood it, it changed the way they thought about color, survival, and even ultraviolet radiation. This is the story of the rough green snake and the hidden superpower that shocked the people who study it for a living. Let's start with the basics, because most people outside of the American South have never even heard of this animal. The rough green snake, known to scientists as Opheodrys aestivus, is a slender, non-venomous colubrid found from Florida up through the Atlantic coastal states, west into Texas, and even down into parts of northeastern Mexico. Adults usually grow between 22 and 36 inches long, but they are so thin that many people mistake them for a vine or a blade of grass rather than a living animal. Their scales are keeled, meaning each one has a tiny ridge running down the center, which gives the snake a slightly rough, textured feel. That texture is exactly where the name comes from, distinguishing it from its smoother, more northern cousin, the smooth green snake. At first glance, this seems like just another small, pretty reptile, bright green on top, pale yellow or white underneath. Big round eyes, a narrow head, harmless, shy, almost delicate looking. It spends nearly all of its life off the ground, weaving through shrubs, hedges, low tree branches, and tangles of vines near rivers, ponds, and wetlands. It is active during the day, which is unusual for many snake species, and it survives almost entirely on insects and spiders, something very few snakes in North America actually specialize in. Most snakes chase down mice, frogs, or other vertebrates. This one prefers caterpillars, grasshoppers, crickets, moths, and spiders, snapping them up with quick, precise strikes and swallowing them whole without ever using constriction. But here's where the story gets strange, and where most people, even snake enthusiasts, start to realize this animal is not what it appears to be. The rough green snake is not actually green. Not in the way you think. There is no green pigment anywhere in its body. None. What you are looking at when you see that vivid emerald color is actually an optical illusion created by two completely different pigment systems working together. Deep in the snake's skin cells, there are yellow pigments called xanthophores. Layered beneath them are specialized cells that reflect blue light through a structural, physical process, not a chemical pigment at all, but a microscopic arrangement of tissue that bends light the same way a soap bubble or a butterfly wing produces color. When yellow pigment sits on top of that blue structural reflection, your eye blends the two together, and the result is the bright green you see slipping through the leaves. It is the exact same principle as mixing yellow and blue paint, except here it is happening inside living tissue in real time on the surface of a snake. This blending trick is elegant while the snake is alive, but it produces one of the strangest, most unsettling phenomena in the reptile world after the snake dies. The yellow pigment is far less stable than the structural blue layer. Within hours, sometimes even less, after death, the yellow pigment begins to break down and fade. And when the yellow disappears, there is nothing left to blend with the blue. The result is shocking to anyone who does not know what is happening. A rough green snake that dies from being run over on a road, caught by a predator, or preserved by researchers in alcohol will slowly turn a vivid, unmistakable blue. Herpetologists and wildlife photographers across the southern states have documented this again and again. Finding what looks like an entirely different, brilliant blue species lying on a gravel road, only to realize it is the same familiar green snake, its yellow pigment simply gone. Museum specimens preserved in alcohol are especially prone to this because the alcohol actively dissolves the yellow pigment and speeds up the transformation. For decades, people who found these blue snakes assumed they had discovered a rare color, morph, or an entirely unknown species. In reality, they had just discovered a body. That alone would make for a strange piece of trivia, but it is not the hidden superpower this video is named after. The real discovery goes much deeper, literally, inside the snake's body cavity. And it has to do with something scientists were not even looking for when they first noticed it. Rough green snakes are unusual among reptiles because they are strongly diurnal, meaning they are active almost entirely during daylight hours, often basking and hunting for extended stretches directly in strong sunlight. Most reptiles that spend that much time exposed to direct sun tend to have some kind of protective adaptation against ultraviolet radiation, the same radiation that damages human skin and DNA. When researchers began dissecting and studying the internal anatomy of these snakes, they noticed something odd. The lining of the body cavity, a thin membrane called the peritoneum, which wraps around the internal organs, was not the usual pale, translucent tissue seen in most snakes. In the rough green snake, it was dense, black, almost like a layer of dark pigment had been painted directly onto the inside of the snake's own organs. At first, this seemed like nothing more than an unusual anatomical quirk, the kind of small detail that gets a footnote in an academic paper and is quickly forgotten. But as researchers studied it further, a more compelling explanation began to take shape. Because these snakes spend so much of their lives basking in direct, unfiltered sunlight, far more than many other reptile species, their internal organs are constantly bathed in a level of solar radiation that would be damaging to most animals over time. The leading theory is that this thick, black internal lining functions as a kind of built-in ultraviolet shield, absorbing and blocking radiation before it can reach and damage sensitive internal tissue. In other words, while the outside of the snake is busy performing an elaborate two-pigment illusion to hide from predators, the inside of the snake has evolved its own separate defense system, a literal internal sunscreen, protecting its organs from the very sunlight that its daytime lifestyle demands. Think about what that actually means. This is a 3-inch wide ribbon of muscle and scale, living in bushes in your backyard in Georgia or Louisiana or Virginia, that has independently evolved both an external optical illusion sophisticated enough to fool birds of prey and an internal radiation shield sophisticated enough to protect its own organs from cumulative sun damage. Two completely different defense systems operating on two completely different biological levels in an animal most people assume is just another plain green snake they occasionally see crossing a garden path. This is part of why herpetologists find the species so fascinating, even though it rarely makes headlines the way venomous snakes or giant constrictors do. There is no drama here. No danger to humans, nothing that inspires fear. And that is exactly why most of the country has never heard any of this. The rough green snake does not bite defensively in any meaningful way. It has no venom. Its teeth are small and designed for gripping soft-bodied insects, not for delivering any kind of harmful bite to a human. When threatened, its first instinct is not aggression, it is stillness. It freezes, and then begins a slow, subtle side-to-side swaying motion, mimicking the way a thin vine or leafy branch moves in a light breeze. Combined with its color, this movement makes an already nearly invisible animal disappear even further into the background, even when a predator is looking directly at the spot where it is sitting. If that freeze and sway trick fails, and a predator or a curious human actually grabs it, the snake has a backup plan, and it is not a pleasant one for whoever is holding it. Paired glands near the base of the tail release a strong, musky, unpleasant-smelling secretion, smeared across the hands or the mouth of whatever grabbed it. It is not dangerous, just deeply off-putting, usually enough to make a bird, a cat, or a human loosen their grip just long enough for the snake to escape into the nearest tangle of vegetation. Some individuals will also gape their mouths open, showing off the dark interior in what looks like a threat display. But even this rarely escalates into an actual bite. Compared to almost every other snake species people picture when they hear the word snake, this is about as gentle and non-confrontational as it gets. Its hunting style tells a similar story of specialization. Unlike snakes that use heat-sensing pits or scent trails to track prey, the rough green snake relies almost entirely on eyesight, which is unusually sharp for a reptile. It moves slowly and deliberately through foliage, scanning for movement. And when it spots something promising, a caterpillar on a leaf, a spider in its web, a grasshopper resting on a stem, it approaches with quick, irregular bursts of motion, then slows dramatically as it closes the final few centimeters. At extremely close range, it curls part of its body into a tight, spring-like coil, then suddenly straightens, propelling its head forward to snatch the prey directly, usually striking at the head or the middle of the body. There is no venom involved and no constriction. It is simply speed, precision timing, and excellent eyesight translated into a clean, mechanical strike that ends with the prey being worked into the mouth and swallowed head first. Reproduction adds another unusual layer to this snake's biology. Rather than each female finding her own hidden nesting spot, multiple females will sometimes lay their eggs together in the same rotting log stump cavity or pocket of moist leaf litter, creating a kind of shared communal nursery. This behavior likely helps keep egg clutches at a stable, protected humidity level, something critically important for developing snake embryos, which can dry out and die if their environment becomes too dry. Females typically lay their eggs sometime between early summer and early autumn. And interestingly, the embryos inside rough green snake eggs are already unusually well developed at the moment they are laid compared to many other snake species, meaning less time is needed for the eggs to incubate before hatching. Despite living across a huge portion of the eastern and central United States, from the swamps of Florida up through New England and as far west as central Texas, the rough green snake remains one of the least recognized native reptiles in the country. Part of that is simply due to how effective its camouflage is. People walk past these snakes constantly without ever seeing them, tucked motionless among leaves at exactly the height of a garden hedge or the low branches of a riverside tree. The other part is cultural. Snakes without venom, without size, without any capacity to genuinely threaten a human being, simply do not generate the same fear-driven fascination that rattlesnakes, cottonmouths, or pythons do. There are no viral videos of a rough green snake attacking anyone because it fundamentally does not do that. Its entire survival strategy for millions of years has been built around not being noticed at all. And yet, ecologically, this quiet, unnoticed little snake plays an important role. As a specialized predator of soft-bodied insects and spiders, it helps regulate populations of caterpillars, grasshoppers, and other arthropods in the shrublands and forest edges where it lives, functioning as a kind of natural pest control long before anyone invented the term. Because it relies so heavily on insect prey, it is also unusually sensitive to pesticide use. In areas where insect populations crash due to heavy chemical spraying, rough green snake populations tend to decline right alongside them, making the species something of a quiet biological indicator for the overall health of the insect populations in a given ecosystem. When rough green snakes start disappearing from a hedgerow or wetland edge, it is often one of the earliest visible signs that something in the local insect food web has already gone wrong. There is also a naming history here that most people never think about. The rough green snake was first formally described all the way back in 1766 by Carl Linnaeus himself, the Swedish scientist who essentially invented the modern system we still use today for naming and classifying living things. Linnaeus gave it the species name aestivus, Latin for of summer, a fitting label for a snake that is almost entirely dormant through the cold months and bursts into activity the moment warm weather arrives. From spring through early summer, it mates. Through the warmer months, it hunts, forages, and lays eggs. And by the time December rolls around in most of its range, it has already tucked itself away into a sheltered crevice, a rotting log, or thick vegetation to wait out the winter in a state of reduced activity. It is also worth understanding just how many different animals see the rough green snake as a meal, because its entire existence is essentially a constant balancing act between finding enough insects to survive and avoiding becoming food itself. Larger snake species will eat it without hesitation. So will many species of birds, including hawks and kites, that are perfectly capable of spotting movement in the canopy and swooping down to snatch it directly off a branch. Domestic cats take a surprising toll on local populations wherever backyards border the kind of hedges and shrubs these snakes prefer. Even some larger spiders have been documented preying on smaller or juvenile individuals, which says a lot about just how small and physically vulnerable this species really is. With no venom, no size advantage, and no aggressive defense mechanisms to speak of, camouflage and stillness are not just helpful traits for the rough green snake. They are essentially the entire strategy standing between it and being eaten. It is easy to confuse the rough green snake with its closest relative, the smooth green snake, and honestly, most people never bother to tell the two apart at all. Both are slender, both are a similar shade of vivid green, and both rely on the same blue and yellow biochrome trick that turns them a startling blue after death. But their ranges and lifestyles diverge quite a bit if you look closely. The smooth green snake tends to live more on the ground, moving through grasslands, meadows, and open prairie habitat, and it is found much further north and west, reaching into Canada and areas the rough green snake never touches. The rough green snake, by contrast, is the more committed climber of the two, spending the overwhelming majority of its life above the ground, in shrubs, vines, and low tree branches, and its range stays concentrated across the warmer southeastern and central United States. The easiest way to physically tell them apart, if you ever get a close enough look, comes down to the scales themselves. Run a finger gently along the back of a rough green snake, and you can actually feel a slight ridge on each individual scale, the keeled texture that gives the species its name. A smooth green snake, true to its own name, feels almost silky and uniform by comparison. None of this has hurt the rough green snake's popularity with reptile keepers, interestingly enough, because it is non-venomous, docile, and strikingly colored. It has become a fairly popular choice among pet owners, even though many individuals sold are wild-caught rather than captive bred, and tend to carry a heavier parasite load and shorter captive lifespan as a result. In the wild, with a steady diet of live insects and room to roam through dense vegetation, these snakes can live for several years, a reminder that even the most harmless, delicate-looking reptile in the woods depends on very specific conditions to actually thrive. So the next time you are walking through a garden, a hedge, or a patch of vines somewhere in the southeastern United States, and you catch a flicker of bright green disappearing into the leaves, take a second look. What you just saw was not simply a green snake. It was an animal wearing a color that technically does not exist on its body, protecting its internal organs with what may be one of the more understated ultraviolet defenses in the entire reptile world, and quietly holding one of the strangest party tricks in nature, the ability to turn a vivid, unmistakable blue the moment it dies. It asks for nothing, threatens no one, and yet carries around more hidden biological complexity than almost any snake most people will ever casually walk past without noticing. That is the real hidden superpower of the rough green snake. Not venom, not size, not aggression. Just a small, gentle, endlessly overlooked animal quietly running two separate, sophisticated survival systems at once, one to hide from the world in plain sight, and one to protect itself from the very sun it depends on to live.